Let me call to order this meeting of the West Palm Beach CRA. We're resuming, continuing the meeting from earlier, and not quite sure where we left off, but I would just open it up, commissioners, for questions or comments. One question I do want to start off with for you, Mr. Rugg and Dan. We heard a representation earlier from representatives of VITA that they felt they could get this wrapped up in 2 weeks. Do you think that is feasible, possible?
Mayor, I don't think it's adequate time. I think there's a lot more questions that still need to be answered, assuming that, you know, we quickly, even if we quickly alleviate all of the issues that we currently have with the KPIs and the pro forma, we still have a tremendous amount of work to do on the operations, the pre-opening budget that was submitted on April 18th. And that is going to require some time to really go through. And so that's what, just, you know, judging by the time it has took to do other things, that's going to take at least 2 or 3 iterations and some time to work through. So I think at best, and then to sit down with the board and obviously share with you all what the final document looks like and everything like that, at best we're looking at June 10th, and that's at best.
All right, Mr. Brown, do you know why the pre-opening budget was submitted? Because I understand it was discussed back in January, February. So why did it take until April 18th to even get the first draft of the pre-opening budget to CRA?
Let me also add that the 50% principal at Vita Lounge just returned from being out of the country. And so he's here, and so now I am off the hot seat. So, but he will address that question. You
will never be off the hot seat, Mr. Brown.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Darren Cummings, 50% owner of Vita. I'm just getting back from my wedding renewal, so excuse my voice a little bit, but we was out the country this weekend, so just literally got off the plane.
Congratulations.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you, Marvin, Tony, Darrell, for representing us. To your question on the pre-opening budget, it took a while for us to even get some of the FF&Es that the city already had. So we didn't understand some of the information. I think I got the FF&Es from V-Star and the architects February 25th. And since February 25th, I've spent almost every week I've been at Sunset bringing in vendors, because it takes a while for your sound system. You know, you have to have the information, you know, small wares. So it takes vendors. You have to bring the vendors in. You have to bring the POS system. So they have to give you a quote. So it takes a minute to go through this process, so for us to understand everything that we needed to provide. And when Dan and Chris said, hey, just give us everything, that's what we did. So that was the reason why it took a little while to get to that point.
Okay. Ms. Rugg, did you want to add any more as to why you think that the 2 weeks is not a reasonable time period? Any other information we should know?
Well, I mean, just, yeah, I mean, looking at it, there's a lot of questions that come up. I mean, I think namely, you know, just, you know, what does it look like with the suppliers? I mean, there's staff salaries in here, you know, the past, you know, there's some, looks like there's a reimbursement component into it. And it's just, it's going to take time to really dissect and go through the details of what they submitted.
Okay. Commissioner Peduzzi.
I'm hoping that, well, if I understood you guys correctly, when you came in here, you weren't expecting staff to recommend the termination of negotiations. No. And I'm hoping that if we do agree to give you some more time, that you will realize that there's some exigency here, and maybe, you know, there needs to be a little more compromise, and knowing that, you know, we still may vote tonight to end this thing. But if you are given that second chance, I hope you realize that there's some exigency here and that we need to come to an agreement. And if, in my mind, there needs to be a hard stop. There needs to be some resolution of this, and it needs to happen soon. Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, do you want me to address that?
You can.
We understand the sense of urgency, and yes, we were quite surprised. I think the mayor asked me, did I think that we were negotiating or that the city was negotiating in good faith? And I took that to mean, was the interaction I was having with your consultant done in good faith? And I stand by that and say yes. The item was publicized for discussion, and staff's, it didn't have staff's recommendation. So the good faith component of this would have been staff advising us why they felt that negotiations should terminate. We think that we could resolve this in short order. And I think the things that came up was KPIs. I think that can be resolved in a short period of time. The agenda was publicized as asking you for direction for a certification of completion. You can't get a CO until you finish the kitchen. And you heard the back and forth just a moment ago about trying to get the FFE and the equipment to fit within the kitchen. The 5-year performance provided, if it's to be an exhibit in the agreement, it's just a matter of adding it as an exhibit. Commissioner Lambert asked, why 47 meetings? I think half of those meetings were back and forth on the pro forma. Why they need another 2 or 3 months when we have always been engaged on the pro forma and the margins, I don't know. We feel it's complete. We've provided an assumption for everything that we have in there, and we've taken their recommendations. The only issue outstanding is obviously finishing the equipment to fit the kitchen and deciding what else is required to get a certificate of occupancy. So from our standpoint, I think we can respond quickly, and we have never been the holdup on anything that was provided to us to provide, including the operating agreement that we turned around the first draft in 2 weeks.
Do you agree with Mr. Rube that there's a lot of discussion that has to take place with respect to this pre-opening budget, which apparently was just submitted to staff a couple of weeks ago? The first draft, which means my CRA staff has got to go through it in detail, and I assume there's going to be some negotiation, tweaking back and forth on even the pre-opening budget, which is a key component.
Yeah, I think that's an open issue, yes, sir. And I think because it has the greatest fiscal impact on the CRA. So yes, the magnitude of the cost. There are other things in there that we provided that is the CRA's responsibility to finish the build out. So yes, obviously they should kick the tires, but as Mr. Cummings explained, it was done with their oversight. We brought in vendors to give an estimate, and so we have worked collaboratively and transparently to provide the budget. So the issue is going to be how does that impact your current budget and how it might impact next year's budget. So we understand that.
Well, the issue is also timing. You said 2 weeks. Mr. Rube says June 10th at the earliest. That's a big gap. How do you respond to do you agree with the June 10th as opposed to the 2 weeks?
I don't know what their response is going to be to the items that we presented. If it's a matter of cost, then we've documented where the estimates have come from. If it's a matter of need, then obviously that's open for discussion. Did you want to add?
So personally, I think a lot of the work has been done with the FF&E, meaning meeting with the vendors, Cheney Brothers, different ones that are here. I've already done a lot of that work. So now it's a matter of us locking ourselves in a room and going through this list and making sure that, whether it's being budgeted here or this is something we agree with we're going to do, but a lot of the, heavy lifting, we've already done the heavy lifting of getting the vendors in. I mean, it's multiple, over 10, almost a dozen vendors we've met with to get these quotes. So a lot of the work has already been done.
Dan, what is your prediction, expectation with respect to the timing of just drilling down on this pre-opening budget? Is that a 2-week process, 2-month process?
I look at this holistically, meaning I look at it in terms of the construction needs. We talked about the meeting that we had, that the chef had with the kitchen designer. And that meeting was designed to look at the current kitchen and say, what modifications do we need to make? So for example, in that discussion, we still need to get some of those numbers back, which we want to have back before we come back to this body. I think what Darren's talking about, we did get the first list. My opinion, we're gonna need to go through that a few times just to make sure that we, A, haven't missed items, or B, there could be items there that are already covered, if you will, in sort of other areas of the pre-opening budget. So we just want to make sure that when we come back, we can present the whole picture. So everybody, all the commissioners, Mr. Mayor, everybody can say, we know what that pre-opening number is. So I do think that to be safe and to make sure we're thorough, we need to allocate the time through that first part of June.
How much time are we talking? Estimate, guesstimate.
Well, I think that Chris was talking about the June 10th meeting. I think it means everything needs to be done, Chris, by the end of, go ahead.
I mean, that's, again, everything is agreed upon that is currently outstanding, and we can basically spend the next month focused squarely on this. And I just think, I mean, June 10th is, it's really ambitious. I mean, it is possible, but I don't know. I got to be honest, Mayor. I mean, just judging by the time it's taken, it's going to take time, and I really
right.
wish I could to give you an estimated time.
I understand it's a guessing game. You don't have a crystal ball. Commissioner Warren?
Thank you all. And I can appreciate that Vita is ready to get started, and you've put a lot of work in here, and you're ready to, you're going to push yourself with that 2-week period. I think the appropriate approach, recognizing what staff has stated and the amount of work that it's going to take for them to go back through, to sift through the information, just synthesize and ensure that everything is proper, and give us all an opportunity to review it. I think that I would be more comfortable with being generous with the amount of time that it's going to take in order to close this out, so that we can do this correctly and not continue to come back and kick this down the road. Let's just put the time in and make sure that the information is correct.
Commissioner Lambert, and then President.
Can you come back to me?
Sure. President Ward.
So, while you guys might have been surprised by Chris's recommendation, I'm looking at it from, I'm not having meetings with you all, and I'm looking at it from paperwork, your letters, responses, timeline. I took the time to read the red lines. When you say all it takes is to add back in that exhibit, the red lines are your name, and you remove that exhibit, just so we're clear on that. So when I look at it, I don't necessarily think this is actually on you guys. This is not a good business deal. And I don't know how to fix that, because I don't want to set you all up for failure. And I voted for you guys originally because I want you to have this opportunity. My problem with it is that just looking at the numbers, and that's why I went back to the leasing conversation. And Dan, I know you wanted to jump in and make comments on that. I don't want to push forward knowing that this is a bad deal when we could have done something and had you guys in a different deal, that maybe you guys could have brought more equity, that you could have had more, say in this and done more things. Overall, it looks like we're trying to push this through because we've gotten far enough. We had an RFP that required the operating versus the lease. I'm nervous about continuing forward on those bases. Just because we've already gotten this far, well, then let's just keep going a couple more months and paying JLL $22,000 a month, the operations $25,000 a month. It's just a hard pill to swallow, given that we're supposed to be stewards of these dollars. And I'm just really more making that as a commentary of why I feel badly that Chris is in this position, and I'm not necessarily shocked from the information that I have received and the timeline that I received from staff and then reviewing your responses. But I know you were jumping at trying, and so that's my only question of this. Do you want time to talk about that?
Couple of things. One, if you look at the way we structured, and again, I'm back to the big we, how we structure the relationship. There's a base management fee, and there's also an incentive. And the incentive is designed to essentially get all of us thinking about profitability as soon as possible. Because really, from the management company's perspective, if you looked at the next 5 years, the goal is to get to a point where there is a share of the bottom line that actually, is, if you will, is shared between CRA and the management company. That's the strategy, so that all of us are focused, on achieving bottom line results. So I do want to say that this is not an agreement where it's just a flat fee and that's it. There is definitely a key incentive to them and all of us to be profitable. So just so you know that piece. The reason why we're so interested in having that 5-year pro forma in the document is so that reminds all of us that, we all, as Tony mentioned, we spent a lot of time collectively on that pro forma. I think we all believe and hope that we will be successful, that we'll be sitting here and we will make the progress. But the pro forma is also there to remind us that we all did spend time when it came to coming up with the 5-year projection. So there's accountability built into the way this is structured. Just so you know, so just when it comes to the agreement, that is part of, and it was structured that way, if you will, on purpose. So it created that kind of environment. The challenge with literally moving to a lease environment is, to some degree, you're almost starting all over, to some degree, right? So you're changing both the relationship dramatically. You're also changing the nature of, if you think about a tenant-landlord relationship, very different, than a management company.
We don't need to go down there because legal's already told us we can't do that. You don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
All right.
Legal's already told us we can't, because the RFP asked for an operating agreement,
Okay.
so we don't have that flexibility.
Mr. Mayor, if I may address Commissioner Ward's question, and since she's had a chance to look at the operating agreement, it's section 3.3. I don't know what draft you're looking at. On my draft, it's page 10. The reason why I think that we could bring an operating agreement before you in short term is because we have built in a period that has a requirement for delivery. And one of the requirements for delivery in that section 3.3 is the collaborative items that the CRA providing the FF&E budget as outlined in a particular section to fund the agreed upon capital improvement plan. Well, if you don't like the capital improvement plan, you won't approve it, right? If that becomes a fiscal issue. But we recognize that there were that we needed time to get this done. And so we have a period to continue the collaboration and to negotiate. And so the requirements for delivery means that if all those items are met, then we get the keys to continue the process to get the facility open. And that's why I think that we can do this in a short period of time.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is that stuff we don't get done in a short while, we just kind of put in a bucket, and that'll be part of the deliverables after the agreement is signed.
Yes, sir.
Which makes me very nervous, because there's certain stuff that we just, I would think, staff needs to have and review and make sure they can review and agree to make sure we have a deal. I don't want the agreement signed if we don't have a deal. And so just to say, well, we could get that to you later, let's just sign the agreement, we'll get it to you later. No, I'm not doing that. That doesn't make me feel comfortable at all. We need to get as much, whatever staff is telling me is essential information, and I believe they've identified the pre-opening budget as one, which in and of itself is going to be time consuming. There may be others on that list. That essential information, they're the subject matter experts. We are the CRA. We have hired a consultant, and if they're telling us certain information is essential to have to ensure that we are on the same page with a deal, to me, that's information we need to have before we sign the agreement.
And
So just to say we'll deliver it later after we sign the agreement, that does not make me feel comfortable whatsoever.
Well, we respect that it's provided, so I guess they need time to give us feedback.
All right. Okay. Any other, Commissioner Lambert, did you remember what you?
Well, it wasn't that I forgot it. It was I was taking into consideration what my colleague had just shared, and asking for more time and giving it even more time to consider this. And I think that there is no question we all want a vibrant, world-class music facility to have everything that, our residents who spoke up earlier talked about, that this was a place of building relationships, and I think you spoke about this, deals being made there. I think we all want that to happen, but I guess, just listening and deliberating over everything that has been shared today is just my concern about getting this done. And Mr. Rugg, you mentioned in one of your reasons of why you were recommending not to move forward was this wasn't, that this process and how long this took was an indication of the execution of what's going to happen. And that's what worries me, is I think that we all want this to move forward. And I've just really lost my confidence in this moving forward to achieve what we all want to achieve. And so I guess it was just a comment. I don't have any other questions. I think they've all been answered.
Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. I just want to say, I want to go back to the KPIs, and I don't know what's going to happen here tonight, but if we move forward, it's non-negotiable for me that we move forward with these KPIs being included, because I think just especially after all the discussion we're having now and the time that it's taken for us to get to this point, there needs to be accountability. We need to be able to see what the performance targets are and that make sure that they're being met. And so that moving forward, that is not going to be a negotiable for me, that we are going to discuss only having 3 out of the 9 required KPIs. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Let me just try to move this thing off the schneid, if you will. I'm going to move that we accept staff's recommendation to terminate negotiations. It passes prologue. I don't expect that this is going to be resolved very quickly. Meanwhile, the meter continues to run on carrying costs for the sunset, as well as our consultants' fees. And I too share a concern about ability to execute. And so I move that we accept staff's recommendation to terminate negotiations. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
Yeah, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion, absolutely.
I think that a lot of time and effort has been put into this, and when I came into this, I was pretty sure that I was going to say that this is futile and we probably should terminate it, but I do think that I have seen that there has been good faith on both sides trying to move this forward. The only way I think I'd feel comfortable, and as Commissioner Fox mentioned, those KPIs, in my mind, if we give you more time, they're not really negotiable in my mind either. They just got to be there. And I'm hoping if we do to give you that more time, that you're really hearing us here today. If you're given more time, I mean, I think it's equally. It might be equal that they vote to terminate today. So if you are given that time, you're going to have to really put in that effort to make it happen, with the knowledge that we're, our patience is running out on this, and you've got to show us that this is going to happen. That's really all I have to say. Other than just, I'd be willing to potentially give them a little more time, but it has to be concrete. It's got to be the next time you come in front of us, you either have an agreement or you don't. And at that point, I'd be willing to terminate.
So meanwhile, the meter continues to run. Commissioner Ward.
I have to second Paducci's comments, because I came in here and the reason I hesitated to second was because I feel like I'm dealing with the same thing we dealt with the first time, is I want you guys to succeed. I don't like this setup. I wasn't around during the initial RFP process. I don't like the way that this was set up. And I think that's my biggest issue. And it's not a personal for you guys. It's just, that's my biggest issue with this. But the other part of me, hearing your responses and hearing the dedication even from Chef, it makes me say, okay, if we have a June 10th date, that's the hard date and no more. And we still work on this because we've got to go forward anyways. We have to have you participate, Dan. We have to have a method to continue forward. And if there is legitimate concerns with the kitchen, for instance, at any rate, we need to figure that out and move forward on it. So that's a long-winded thing of saying that's kind of why I hesitated to second the mayor's motion and why I tend to agree with Peduzzi's comments.
Commissioner Warren?
Just for clarification, because I didn't hear who seconded the motion.
Commissioner Lambert?
Thank you.
What I'm afraid of is that we give the additional time, we kick the can down the road to whenever, June. We have incurred at least another month and a half of carrying costs, paying our consultant, and we still don't have a deal. That's what I'm concerned about. Again, past is prologue. Now we're hearing a sense of urgency. Where was that 2 or 3 months ago? January, February, March. You know, they're pointing the fingers at staff and saying it's the CRA's fault. But again, there didn't seem to be the sense of urgency. And I look at the pre-opening budget as kind of a pretty key document, which was discussed in January and February, and we don't get it till April. Yeah, all right, so you're meeting with vendors, and I just don't believe that it takes that long to get that document, which is as essential as it is, that it takes that long to get it into the hands of staff so we can begin. That's a first draft. We're just beginning the process of going through that with the fine-tooth comb. So, I mean, I heard staff say that June 10th is even aggressive. My thing is, let's just rip the Band-Aid off, cut our losses, and figure out a way for it, because I still have concerns, and I've heard others express it, about the ability to execute. And what these several months of negotiation have even suggested about the execution ability. I'm very, very nervous, and I'm nervous to the extent I'm not sure I want to invest more of the CRA's money in this particular process. It's probably better rip the Band-Aid off and see how we can move forward in a different direction, as opposed to continue to try what I think forcing a square peg into a round hole, which I think is what we're doing here. We're trying to ensure, or basically say, okay, I think they could do it. I think they can. I think they can. I think we need to confront reality here. All right, any other discussion? Commissioner Peduzzi.
Just briefly, I think everyone remembers I wasn't one of the ones that supported this group to begin with, because I thought the other one was more capable of executing the plan with less commitment of public funds. And they also had scored tops on the tasting and the other event, or the technical review committee. But now that we're here, my colleagues have made the decision that they felt that you guys were best for this, and I promised you that I would keep an open mind and I would hope for the best and hope for success, and I really mean that. And that's probably why I'm here tonight saying I'm willing to give you a second chance, even though you weren't my first choice. I just think you are trying, and I think you need to try a little harder, though. And I think that there has to be that hard deadline, because I will vote to terminate next time if it gets there. We'll see what happens here tonight.
Let me also say, this has nothing to do with my original vote on RFP. This is based upon post-RFP activity. So this is nothing to do with where I was with respect to the RFP. I'm looking at activity post-RFP. Another thing I'm concerned about is the minimal amount of equity that's being kicked into this deal by this group, with the expectation that the CRA is going to pay a whole bunch of money. I can't believe that there are no more equity dollars. I understand you may not be able to get a loan or something, but If this is the kind of opportunity that is desirable, I would imagine there would be other investors who would be willing to put some equity into the deal so that you have more skin in the game. You guys ain't got a lot of skin in this game. And we as a CRA are kind of expected to carry the load, and we may have to, chip in more based upon the document you presented us. That also makes me very uncomfortable. All right, any other comments, questions? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, like sign?
Nay.
All right, so what is that, 2 to 4? Okay, that motion doesn't carry. So it looks like we'll continue to negotiate. Does anybody want to make another motion as to how we move forward on this?
I move that we come back on the June CRA meeting and bring this to a vote as to whether if they've reached an agreement or not, and the recommendation has changed, and then we make the decision at that time.
Second.
Discussion. The only thing that makes me nervous about that is there's another bite of the apple. If you would be willing to modify that motion to say that if they do not come back with a signed agreement on or before the June 10th meeting, then we automatically terminate. So otherwise we get to the June 10th meeting and we're just having the same conversation that we're having now.
I'm fine making that amendment.
There's an automatic termination if they don't have the signed agreement by June 10th, and I could go along, because then we don't have any more decision points.
Yeah, I'm fine making that amendment. As stated.
Second.
Amend the motion to state that if you do not have an assigned agreement with all the exhibits completed by the June 10th date, that this negotiation is terminated.
Automatically, right? Without a
Yes,
further
terminated.
Clarification, can we do that where we're making a decision now for the next meeting?
Well, the next meeting is scheduled, I think. June 10th is the next scheduled.
But can you say, though, that we are going to terminate if they don't come to us with, or do we have another vote
No,
then?
well, what your motion is that they bring you back a signed agreement for the June 10th meeting, or it's terminated. You wouldn't have to make the motion twice, no.
Any further discussion on the amended motion? Commissioner Lambert.
Do we need to give staff some direction on what are some of these items that we want to see? I heard Commissioner Fox say, all 9 of the KPI items she wanted to see. I've heard Mayor you say some more skin in the game with financials. I've mentioned wanting to see the ownership documents. Staff, do you feel like you have enough direction to be able to come to an agreement?
So I will tell you that it's likely that additional dollars are going to be allocated. So under this direction, what I would bring forward is not only the operations agreement, but then all of the other necessary documents, whether it's financial or budgetary, all of those things would come along with it, so that, it's very clear, not only the operations agreement, so that VITA can illustrate to you how the Sunset Lounge would operate, but then also the financial commitment that's going to be needed to make it successful based on the agreement that we have brought forward. So it would be all of it, in addition to the asset management agreement with JLL.
Mr. Mayor?
Follow up?
Yes.
And currently, our agreement expired at the end of March with JLL, so then we'll have April, May, and maybe part of June?
Yes, so we would bring back in June the funding for the work authorization that covers April, May, June, and then moving forward under the operations agreement.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I was looking to defer to our legal counsel. I don't think we have any issues on the June 10th date. I think the issue of automatic terminating negotiations, that there are requirements that are required of the CRA. And if your staff doesn't believe that they can meet those requirements without your direction, then it seems that it creates a legal issue for some party. And that's my only concern, is the automatic termination of negotiations if you haven't been informed what the impasse is, if there is one. But we have no issues with the June 10th date.
President Ward.
To Chris Roog's point, I mean, if you're coming back here asking for more dollars, I mean, the JLL, my rationale in this is, if we terminate it today, we still have to go over what our next step is. You're probably still gonna be involved in that next step, what that looks like or not. There's still things that we need to do to get the building up to speed. If we were to terminate, we'd still have to go forward and use what I understand from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, we would still need to use some of those dollars already allocated to continue to make this space available, potentially if somebody else moved in. So that's where my head is at, is a rationale of 2 months. If you're coming back here in 2 months to say, hey, now I need to make a request to change the budget and add more, that's a whole different discussion that goes back to, okay, well, even if we did have a signed agreement, it's not necessarily gonna be that I'm gonna say, okay, yes, now we have 2 million more that you need to allocate on top of what we've discussed tonight, potentially, because you haven't reviewed that. That doesn't mean I'm automatically gonna accept and move forward and say, well, we said we would move forward if you had a signed agreement. So I don't want that to be the impression here either.
I don't think you can legally sign an agreement that you
Right.
don't have the funding allocated for to do.
It's
So,
mostly just to let everybody be clear on the situation, not necessarily that there would be a legality of being forced to move forward.
Well, when we said signed agreement, it's signed by by VITA or whatever they're calling themselves. And then it would come to us for consideration as to whether we would sign it. So,
that's correct, and you would still have the ability if there were too much, although I don't know that staff would, and I guess that's up to staff, would provide an agreement that would put additional monies for them to sign as the agreement that they're gonna recommend to you to approve if there's not enough money to get there, that's all.
but getting back to the automatic termination, from a legal standpoint, does that present any issues in your opinion, Madam City Attorney?
I can't imagine why. I didn't quite understand what the rationale was coming from the other side, but if you have a motion that you want to see a signed agreement by the proposers come to you on or before June 10th, otherwise the negotiations are terminated, I see no legal reason why you couldn't make that motion.
All right. Well, that's the advice from my attorney.
I think the comments Mr. Mayor clarified is what you're expecting is that we have sat and negotiated, and that the terms and conditions that's being presented to you, VITA agrees with them. And that if there are other conditions like the budget, that's subject to your approval,
Yeah,
okay? And that's in.
but at the minimum, even before we as a body would go down that road, we would need to see from VITA the signed agreement. If we don't cross that threshold by June 10th, there's no further conversation.
Because obviously we know that the agreement is not legal unless you approve it, so.
Exactly.
Right, okay,
Yeah.
that's clear.
Any further discussion on the motion? Commissioner Peduzzi.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about that whole automatically terminating versus, it's not an approval though also. So if you come back without something signed, and who knows what the circumstances are surrounding why it's not signed, you say they refuse to even pick up the phone and answer it, and they won't, that I'd probably have a problem with terminating automatically. But it also doesn't mean because you come back with a signed agreement that we're gonna approve it. Should we just not say it automatically terminates and just say we will hold a vote at that point on whether to terminate or whether to move forward as opposed to an
What
automatic?
have we spent our time for? If we're gonna have the same conversation on June 10th that we're having now, we haven't progressed. We've just spent another 2 months, and we may be at the same position of stalemate. That's why I was asking. That's why I was saying let's at least have something of certainty. A benchmark that has to be crossed or achieved, or else all bets are off. We're shutting it down.
I'm certainly not certified in government law, so I'd have to defer to Ms. Rothenberg, but I would think that that might not withstand a legal challenge just because of the fact that you're saying it's automatically terminating without considering the circumstances. If the CRA decides, hey, we just have to back off and not answer the phone and do anything, and it's going to terminate because we're not going to have a signature. So I just don't know that that's going to withstand legal muster.
Well, I think we presume our staff is going to act in good faith. I don't think they've done us that anything to date that suggests that they're just going to sit on their hands and not negotiate. Because they understand that the clock, the meter's running.
And I'm not suggesting that, Mayor. I know that our staff wouldn't do that, but I'm saying, what would a court look at it if a court were to look at something? That's all.
We have advice from our lawyer that we can make a motion to that effect. I think that motion is advisable because now we won't have this same conversation on June 10th that we're having now. And we will hopefully have reached some degree of certainty. It's very easy. If they don't come back with a signed agreement, boom, we're not negotiating anymore. If they come back with a signed agreement, then we have a decision to make as this body as to whether that agreement is something we want to work with. If they come with a signed agreement, that doesn't mean we automatically have to accept it. That means we now can have the follow-on conversation as to whether that signed agreement is something that we as this body should accept. But if they don't have the signed agreement, then we don't have to repeat this conversation on June 10th. It is, and they know coming into it that this is, it's terminated. Commissioner Lambert.
I know that in reviewing all the documents that staff received some communications from VITA a few days or a week prior to this meeting, and it didn't allow you enough time to do complete due diligence on that. Is there a time that what is the appropriate time? If we're looking to come back on June 10th, I would hope that that conversation wouldn't happen again where you got it on June 9th or June, what date is it that you need that by so that we can have clear expectations?
Right. I think ideally, in preparation, for example, for this date, that's why we set the April 10th date, so that we could get everything ready for the agenda item, meet with all the commissioners, be very clear, individually, so if we could go through any details, prepare for the presentation for the board meeting, and then collectively present what is the operations agreement. That was the plan for April 10th. I would want to do something similar. So that means that I think we need a minimum of having everything buttoned up 2 weeks prior, so that we can do all of those things, and even that is cutting it close. But ideally, we have everything 2 weeks prior to June 10th, and then that puts us at the end of May. So it's like 3 weeks. But again, I'm assuming that at this point, all of the open items they're agreeing to, and that we go right into the pre-opening budget so that we can be hyper-focused on one item in order to bring forward an agreement that really does, we have all the answers for you, and that they can clearly articulate how the Sunset Lounge is going to work. And you know that when you step into the Sunset Lounge, when it opens, exactly how it's going to operate because they have articulated that.
Any other, Commissioner Warren, and then Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. I trust that our staff will operate in good faith and that we'll be able to move forward, but I am cautious of the language about automatically terminating. I agree with my colleague in the event that VITA comes back and says, you know what, we agreed on a lot of things, but there's a bitter pill that's built into this that we simply do not agree with, and that it doesn't give them the opportunity to continue to negotiate. If in fact we're saying, if you don't agree whatever it is that staff says without having the opportunity to work it out, then it terminates when it comes back to us. I just think that we've come this far, that we can move forward, and that in the event that we decide to terminate on June 10th, then we decide to terminate on June 10th and we move forward.
We're just going to have a repeat of the same conversation June 10th we're having now. Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. I like the idea of setting a date, though, for everything to be to our executive director And then we can have the opportunity to talk about this before we get to a meeting like this. Because as I said at the beginning of the meeting, I supported you twice, but I am concerned. We have to be stewards of our public money, and I do not want to go past June 10th. That, I don't, whether or not we put it in our motion tonight, that's, going to be automatic or not, I'm just saying it out loud, that's the drop dead date for me, and I have been your biggest supporter up until now. But I feel like we need to either move forward or figure out how we're going to move forward in some other manner. So I would recommend that we do decide on a date. May 29th looks like it's 2 weeks before that's Memorial Day. But, I want everyone to be clear when we leave tonight that everything is going to be to Chris by a certain date. So he has the time to make sure that he can communicate with us. And if he feels like the things are not ready still at that point, we will all know 2 weeks in advance and be able to move forward at that point without having to go through another meeting like this. So that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
So basically, you're moving the deadline up. Instead of June 10th, you're moving up to...
Well, I think Chris is saying he needs at least 2 weeks to look at everything, and I want to make sure that we don't run out of time on June 10th just because he didn't have the time to look at it. So, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so generally, I don't think it's just good practice to drop something on the board the day before the meeting. That becomes very cumbersome for you all, especially with an agreement that I think has a lot of moving parts like this one.
So what do you need to see and by when before you feel like you're going to recommend cutting the cord?
Well, I mean, ideally, 2 weeks to get, sorry, I'm looking at Nancy just because of the agenda item schedule and everything. I think at least 2 weeks, and that's to have ideally a signed agreement, knowing that we have the pre-opening budget all squared away. I know the expenditures or any kind of financial requirements that are going to come along with the operations agreement, as well as the expenditures for JLL and the operations agreement, so that we can bring all of that forward. And then in those 2 week periods, it would be essentially briefing the board individually, as well as preparing the presentation with Vita on what is on the operations agreement, so that we can go through it soup to nuts.
Yes.
So I see that the 27th is a holiday. That would be 2 weeks prior. Given that Vita has said that they could get things ready in 2 weeks, what if we gave them 3 weeks? So 1, 2, 3 would be May 20th, which then would give staff 3 weeks, even with a long holiday weekend. Chris, do you feel like?
More time is always better.
So what is it that he's getting in 3 weeks? Is it a signed agreement? Let's just make it clear what the deliverable is that we're looking for. Is it a signed agreement?
Yeah, that's what I thought we were discussing.
Honestly, on the pre-opening budget, it's going to be ambitious.
But listen, whatever deadline we have is so you say, what do you need by June, what is it, May? What did you say, May what?
She said May 20th.
What do you need by May 20th?
Pardon me, Faye Johnson for the record, City Administrator. Given that I am responsible for coordinating the agenda, I just want to put the time frame in the record. So typically, the agenda item is due 6 weeks prior to the meeting. And I know that we have the ability to bring an item in and expedite it. But if we're looking at a June 10th meeting, the board should keep in mind that the draft agenda that is published to the public would be published on May 31st. So Chris needs to back in or work in whatever time he needs to be able to review it and have the one-on-ones with the board if you wanted to get on the May 31st draft agenda that is published to the public and then is discussed in agenda review, which will be held on June 6th. Now, at the very latest, certainly at the mayor's discretion, I could bring an item added to the June 6th agenda review as late as June 5th. We don't like to do that because the public likes to know what's going to be on the draft agenda and discuss at agenda review on June 6th. So you got a very tight window in terms of flexibility if you're going to back into your one-on-one meetings.
So in light of that, Commissioners, and again, I think we're talking about a signed agreement. What date did you want Chris to
Just
receive that
officially
signed agreement?
Withdraw my motion just because there's been so many changes and we just wait until we figure this discussion out? Or can we not have discussion while we're doing this?
From Robert's rules, you got to get a consent of the second.
Oh, okay. Did I even
To
get the
withdraw
second for
You
my?
did.
I seconded it.
Okay.
So I give my consent to withdraw it.
Okay, so motion is withdrawn. We no longer have a motion on the floor. So, we're having this discussion. What is it, what date do you all want to see something delivered to Chris? No, not something, a signed operating agreement delivered to Chris by?
Mayor,
Yeah.
if I may, I think that my problem I have from a legal standpoint is that we're signing an agreement before you have even considered it. So
Yeah,
now maybe,
which is typical.
no, but I mean, no, but maybe it's like deliverables. He's expecting deliverables by a certain date. But we can't sign the agreement on one side without knowing that the city's gonna accept it.
Is, Madam City Attorney, that would
We
normally
would,
happen?
we would, I believe that the proposal is all parties continue on with their negotiations in good faith to come to an agreement that is agreeable, that it's presented to your team and they are signed. And then it goes to the commission. Most all of our contracts, with very few exceptions, are signed by the proposer or the vendor or the person before they come to the commission or the CRA board for approval. That
Before
is
you-
not uncommon practice.
We concur.
All right, so what's the date? In light of what the city administrators told us, we're talking about June 4th, 5th?
May 24th?
No, we're back to May.
Well, because if she needs to have it by the 31st, then we have to have time to meet on that first week before he submits to agenda. I thought that's what Administrator Johnson was saying.
May 31st is when I will publish the draft agenda. Now, as an exception, which is we typically don't do, if the item is not on my draft agenda published May 31st, I can do an add delete sheet and put the item on as late as June 5th, which would be the day before your agenda review of June 6th. I absolutely have to have the item on your draft agenda that you will discuss an agenda review on June 6th for your June 10th meeting. So that's my window between May 31st, if it's not already on the draft agenda, then through an add delete for agenda review between June 3rd and June 5th, because I absolutely have to have it on for June 6th agenda review discussion.
Commissioner Fox.
Thank you. Weren't we just talking about having it to him by May 20th?
That's about.
So that would be 3 weeks from today, and then give you 3 weeks to look at it?
Pick the date.
I would think May 24th, and frankly, I mean, I see Dan's face on this. I mean, is this even enough time to get this done?
My,
To call you
my
out.
face was more, I just wanted to commit, if you will. You know, I think, Commissioner Lambert, this really was a little bit of your question. I just want to commit that, you know, the minute, if this is the decision, we're here to, I mean, we're gonna do everything we can. So, I mean, we feel as if we're part of the whole team here, so we're gonna work together, trying to figure out, because there's back and forth that needs to go on. So I think that we do want to make sure there's enough time to do that right. I mean, we want to make sure we're coming back with a pre-opening budget that everybody goes, you know, that everybody can look at and go, okay, that makes sense to us. So I just want that commitment to be known, that we're gonna work collaboratively and do everything we can to make sure that we collectively can achieve this.
Mayor.
Yes.
Well, how much time is that?
Well, the only reason I'm not giving it an exact time is there's some things that that literally take some back and forth.
Because
So
I
there may
think
be
that
some-
if we're going to do this, we want to do it right. Like, I don't know that anybody wants to set them up for failure. We want to do this right. And so if 2 weeks, 3 weeks is not enough time, and we're going to move forward, then we need to figure out how much time is needed. Because if we're setting these deadlines and you're not going to be able to come to a solution, then I don't know what we're doing setting these deadlines.
Agreed. That's why I made the caveat, assuming that all of the open items are agreed upon, and we go directly into the pre-opening budget, and we can focus on that. And that is the only outstanding item, because that has all the budgetary impacts. Then if we can get the pre-opening budget, considering that, you know, we've only looked at it preliminary, we are going to need at least 3 weeks on the pre-opening budget.
3 weeks of negotiation or 3 weeks of review?
That
both?
includes both.
So then that's the week of the 20th. And then follow-up is just that you're saying everything else has to be agreed upon.
Correct.
As of today.
Yes.
And I know that we're not negotiating today, but is that something that we should ask if they're agreeable to? Because we're making an assumption here. Attorney, if I ask that, is that negotiating, or can I ask that?
You're not negotiating, you're simply asking if they agree to what Chris thinks they've agreed to. So, I don't know, but
Okay,
but
well, then
after
I'll
that,
ask.
that would probably be the only question.
Mr. Brown, is that, so what we're looking at is making sure that we give you ample time to be successful. I think there's no question we all want this to be successful. And so we want to allow, in keeping that we've all discussed a June 10th deadline, that to be able to get there, that the one item for you all to negotiate is the pre-opening budget. And what I've heard from Chris and the consultant is that there is possibly enough time to negotiate that if you all agree upon all of the other items.
I think the best person on our team to answer that would be Chef Woods, if I may ask him to address it.
And while he's coming forward, we still haven't gotten responses to the last draft of the document that we sent to the city. So it's kind of hard to say, well, yeah, we'll agree to it, and we haven't gotten responses on the operating agreement itself. You follow me? So until they say, well, no, we'll agree to A, B, and C, we don't know whether we have an agreement or not.
So-
I thought Chef Woods was gonna answer that.
So we had this meeting today, and two things came up, KPIs and the opening budget. We don't disagree with KPIs. We believe in KPIs. We believe in being held accountable. We don't agree on the weights of the KPIs, so that still has to be negotiated. As far as the budget goes, we presented a number to the CRA and said, this is what you need above what you have for a budget. They have to look at that. They've now had it for a week and a half. I'm not sure if they looked at it or not, but they have the information. So they're gonna have to come back and ask for money. What that number is, we don't know. There's some things that are in their document, that are in our document, that are in there twice. This is the part that we have to go through. But we can come to an agreement in a quick manner. It won't take us that long, because we've already done the homework. We
So
already
you're
know what it
saying
takes.
at a minimum, there's gonna be your budget is gonna include a request for more money from the CRA. You just saying that out the gate right now.
I know
Only
the-
budget you would agree to is something that's gonna require more money from us?
I know the budget that is proposed, Mayor, and again, I'm going to remind you what I said earlier today. This is a restaurant with a bar, with a second floor facility for 300+ people and an outside bar. You don't have enough money budgeted to open this properly.
In your opinion?
I'm an expert. I have 35 years doing this. I've opened 25 restaurants around
And
the
that's
country.
beautiful, but you don't dictate to us
It's not my
what money
opinion.
we're gonna allocate to this project. We may decide, fine, if that's the money you need, we ain't gonna do a deal with you.
I agree.
You don't tell us what kind of money we gonna allocate to this.
I'm
You
not
don't tell
telling
us
you.
that.
I'm saying the money that is allocated is not enough.
All right. Based upon the budget you presented.
We didn't present the budget. It's the budget that your staff presented to us.
Didn't you present a pre-opening budget to them in April?
We got a number and was told, this is the number, make it work.
Did you present a pre-opening budget to them in April?
Not in April.
When did we get the pre-opening budget?
We got the pre-opening budget April 18th.
Okay, that's April. You presented a pre-opening budget to them, which we have not gone through yet. But what you're saying is that
Yes, April. Sorry,
you will
yes,
not
April.
accept any tweaks to that budget which doesn't require more money from us. That's what you're saying?
That's not what I said, Mayor.
Okay.
What I said was, the budget that was presented to us, that apparently is allocated for this project, is not enough for the project.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Commissioner?
Mayor, I would like to know from the CRA, if they are saying, no, we aren't going to consider your comments to the operating agreement, that's it? When do we get their response to our comments to the operating agreement?
Well, before we go there, I think you're muddling the issue. The issue is, what does this board need to see? And I believe it was a signed agreement by when, in order for us to even consider moving forward with this deal. I think that's the question that's kind of on the table. Am I right? So we need to see a signed agreement, signed operating agreement, and I think the only issue is by what date. I've heard May 20th, I've heard May 24th, because we need to put that into some kind of motion. So does anyone want to make a motion with the date in it and the deliverables so we can see if we have consensus on that? Yeah, Commissioner,
That just
President.
brought up a whole other, I don't remember this in the discussions. I know that there's a potential of more money that we have discussed, but was it presented by you all to them that there would be more money needed to do this?
No.
Dan?
Well, but I just want to say this. Thank you. And again, we've worked closely on this. I'm not ready to say quite yet that what's been requested is more than what's been allocated, to be honest with you, because we just haven't looked at the chef mentioned duplication. We had a designer who met with a chef, that whole thing I talked about really looking at how could we essentially adopt or what could we do from kitchen design perspective that would be workable. So we're still getting some of that back. So I don't know, Chef. I'm not ready to say that it's over yet. I think we need to go through this and be able to come back and say we have scrubbed the list, we've worked together, and here's where we are. And we just received what we needed to do that. So I think we're getting ahead of ourselves on automatically saying there's an overage, because we still have work that we need to do that we want to do to really finalize that question.
And I think Mr. Fenton's comment is a fair one, right? You've presented a budget. I think you've carried over for a couple of years, and you have an architectural probable cost that prices have changed. We've learned that some of the items that your previous consultants have priced are no longer available. So it's not the fact that we've given you a wish list without being sensitive to your fiscal responsibilities. It's that you had a budget. The building has sat empty for 2 years. We've looked at what V-Star and others had recommended for furnishings and fixtures, and we're getting different prices based on today's dollars, not 2 years ago. And we understand that's going to be a fiscal impact issue, and we'll present it, hopefully justifiable, with staff's recommendation to go forward. And I know that that's a sensitive item, and we're not presenting a number for the sake of presenting it. So thank you for the direction.
Commissioner Baduzzi.
So just for clarification, for my own edification, when this signed agreement is done, does it have the budgetary numbers in it also? Or are you going to come with an agreement and say, okay, we've agreed to all these things and here's the budgetary ask? Or is it all packaged together?
So in order to understand the full impact, I would want to bring forward the entire package, the fiscal resolution, the allocation for, everything, so that moving forward that, okay, at this point, we are off and running with the operations, and it would be the full package.
Do they have to, does the agreement have to be signed with an agreement also on that budget, or can that be determined afterward? Did they have to agree with, in that 2 weeks or whatever, in that signed budget, signed agreement?
If the direction is to bring back a signed agreement, then, and every, we go through all of this, I'm going to bring forward both. Since we're funding it all, I think that they're just like, this is what the number is, based on the negotiation. So if it's additional dollars, then it'll be additional dollars that comes back.
Commissioner, if I can help, I think your question is, does that dollar amount appear in the contract? And the answer to that is yes. And what Chris is saying, in addition to that, if those dollars find themselves in the contract, there are resolutions that he would prepare and draft for you to have and consider for approval at the same time. So if your consensus is to approve the agreement, you would also approve the funding at the same meeting.
Right, but in addition, like we had planned for the asset management component, I would bring forward that as well. That's not necessarily a party to, but it's augmenting the operations agreement to ensure success.
I just want to add one comment here. The goal was to have an exhibit that the commissioners could look at and say that represents the pre-opening, those are the needs for pre-opening. So all the way as detailed as it possibly could be. That was the goal, which we think is important. And by the way, we really think it's important from a planning perspective also. So even if you think about all the things that go into opening a business, this is an important, if you will, exercise, more than exercise that you have to do. So we couldn't open the lounge anyway without going through this. And we felt it was important to have it as an exhibit, again, so everybody was comfortable with where we were. And so, for example, Mr. Mayor, you talk about overage or underages. We really wanted to get that nailed down ahead of time and really look at that together and then present that together.
Okay, so you'll present it with some form of, what will be presented to us by date certain, I think that this board is asking for, is an agreement signed by them. Whatever they're comfortable signing is what will be presented to us. Now, presumably that will come with recommendations. Recommendation to accept, recommendation to deny, right? Just because they have presented a signed agreement doesn't mean you're necessarily going to recommend that we accept that signed agreement, because there may be overages in there that you feel are beyond the pale. I don't know. But the signed agreement, and make sure everybody understands this, does that mean that's necessarily the agreement we are going to agree to? Correct? We
That is correct. Yes, that is correct, Mayor.
We'll see the signed agreement. We've seen what they are willing to accept as a deal, but that doesn't necessarily, and they understand they are taking the risk when it comes to us that we don't accept that deal.
And I want to say that we understand that. As I outlined, you did not get the outline of the agreement. In my introduction to you, I outlined the things that protect your interests. Your approval of the budget, whether it's the pre-opening, year one budget, that's at your discretion. We understand that. That's what we negotiated.
Okay.
Okay, so there's no issue. There are no issues with us. Thank you for giving us the additional time. We are going to work diligently to meet our deadline. And if there are any issues that we think your staff is not acting in good faith, you will hear from our legal counsel, period. Other than that, we are going to work diligently and address the concerns that you've presented tonight to get resolved expeditiously.
What we have not resolved is the date by which we should receive this. So return to that question. Yes, Commissioner Lambert.
It's been proposed Monday, May 20th and Friday, May 24th. What if we just take Wednesday, the 22nd? And that gives, I think it gives everybody equal time to look over it. I think there's a holiday, long weekend in that. on the CRA side, but I want to give enough time
We'll make a
to
motion.
the applicant, but I also want to give enough time to staff to meet with us, to review the documents, so
Make a
That's-
motion.
I'm not making the motion.
No, you're not gonna make the motion, okay. Somebody make the motion. Commissioner Fox, you wanna say something? I thought you had your hand up. I'm not-
I did, but I think I was just going to say the same thing as.
Okay, is there a motion?
I move that we move forward with a date certain of June 10th with this information and with the signed agreement from VITA to be presented to Chris, to be presented to our CRA for review by May 22nd.
Second.
We moved in second, discussion. Everyone understand the motion? I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, like sign, nay. I vote nay. All right, so the motion passes 5-1.
Thank you.
All right. And
Thank you.
without any, there's nothing else for the good of the body, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.